All right, so on the back of that, Bester appeared in court on Friday for the first time after breaking out from one of the country's most secure prisons less than a year ago. At his court appearance, Bester, through his lawyer, asked to be furnished with his deportation documents, confirming that he does not have a South African identity document. As the way Bester and Dr Magudumana were brought back to South Africa will have any legal implications. Perhaps to get some thoughts on this, we speak now to legal commentator and attorney Kabelo Seabi. Kabelo, good afternoon. Thank you for your time here on the SABC.
Good afternoon to you and good afternoon to the viewers.
Let's unpack what's transpired to date, the legalities around the case. We heard Bester's lawyer informing us yesterday that informing the court that Bester has not been eating because he doesn't trust the food and does not feel safe. What is your take on this?
Look, the complaint about the food, it's a valid one in a sense that you must remember that the prisoners that are held in correctional facilities are entitled to humane treatment. They should be given food or nourishment that would be acceptable or of an acceptable standard. And obviously, if a person has got a specific dietary regime, they should also be, they should try to cater for that.
Just on the back of that, Kabelo, one wonders if there really is an imminent threat on his life, or is this just one of the tactics by him to play victim and get his way in the facility? Talk to us how you'd view that.
Look, what was striking about the appearance of Mr. Bester was when his legal representative addressed the court to the effect that they require the documentation that was used to bring him back to South Africa. When that request was made, it triggered off the spectacle that they probably want to raise the issue that him being brought back to South Africa did not unfold correctly in terms of the law. You must remember that for Mr. Bester and also for Dr. Nandipha Magudumana to have been brought back, there should have been compliance with the Tanzanian Immigration Act, so that when they leave Tanzania and they come to South Africa, that process needed to be a lawful process. Because if they were not brought to South Africa through a lawful process, the South African court will not have jurisdiction to try those cases against them.
Kabelo, Bester requesting his deportation documents and wants to know what ID number was used. I mean, if he doesn't have one, does this make any difference in how things are handled and processed from here on to?
Look, the ID number is not that crucial, but what is crucial is the fact that he needed to have been transported his movement from Tanzania to South Africa needed to be lawful. You must remember that when you are tried in a South African court, one of the defenses that can be raised in terms of pleas in court is that the court does not have jurisdiction to try you. And that plea is dependent on whether or not the process of bringing you before court was a lawful process or not. If your appearance before that court was preceded by an unlawful act in bringing you before that court, the court will not try the charges against you.
So questions were raised about how to bring him back into the country via deportation or extradition. And time seemed to be one of the biggest factors in deciding which route to take. Could there have been an unintended consequence for using the deportation route, just on the back of what you've spoken about now?
Indeed so. You must remember with an extradition, It is a process where a person who has been sought by one country requested or is being requested to be surrendered for trial in another country. Now, there would have been a process in the Tanzanian courts to determine whether these people should be surrendered to the South African courts to be tried in South Africa. A case in point or an example would be the Bushiri matter. Bushiri is appearing in a Malawian court and he's contesting that he should not be extradited to South Africa. That is where a surrender of the person is made, and that is done through a judicial process, and there would be a court order that says this person must be surrendered from the one country to the other country. Now, with deportation, it's a very different matter. When you are in a country and for one reason or the other, you are viewed as a prohibited immigrant, that country can issue an order to say to you that you are not, if I may put it in simple terms, you are not welcome to stay in that country. You must leave their territory. Now, that is not equal to an extradition. It is not a process where a person is surrendered to be tried in another country. That person is simply told to leave the territory of that country. And in this instance, if Tanzania had issued deportation orders, those deportation orders would have been served on Bester and also on Nandipha Magudumana to say that they are prohibited immigrants, they must leave Tanzania. The difficulty that arises is that you must remember that immediately they were apprehended in Tanzania, there was a team that was sent from South Africa. I think the minister called it a trace and track team that went to Tanzania, and they were put on a chartered plane and sent back to South Africa. And if they were brought to South Africa without compliance with the Tanzanian Act, basically if they did not agree to leave Tanzania and come to South Africa, or if they were compelled to leave Tanzania and come to South Africa, they could raise that as the scenario where the court in South Africa will not have jurisdiction because they were brought to South Africa without due process.
All right, so then, Kabelo, on the back of that, we'll explore the difference between deportation and extradition. If the deportation, for that matter, wasn't handled correctly, could all the new charges that both Bester and Dr Magudumana, in fact, fall away? How would you explain that?
Yes, the scenario is backed up. There is a very settled principle in the South African law that the court will not have jurisdiction to try a person that has been brought before it through a process where they are taken from one country and brought to this country without due process. There's a leading case of a former ANC member, Mr. Ibrahim, who was kidnapped from Swaziland, brought to South Africa. He was tried in a South African court. He was convicted and sentenced. On appeal, the SCA, which then was called the Appellate Division, came with the principle that it cannot be that a person is taken from one country and brought to South Africa through a process that is not above board. If that happens, the South African court cannot try that person. So similarly, if Bester and Magudumana were taken from Tanzania to South Africa without the due process, that may lead to the outcome that the court will refuse to try Magudumana and will refuse to try Bester on these charges, because the court will say that their appearance in court was preceded by an unlawful act.
Well, Kabelo, thank you for that insight. Thank you for joining us here on the SABC and really unpacking, some of the legalities around the manner in which both Thabo Bester and Dr. Nandipha Magudumana were brought back into the country, the implications they are for the case before the court. So as the story unfolds, again, lots more questions and answers at this point. But Kabelo Seabi is a legal commentator weighing in on the Thabo Bester saga as it unfolds.